Now, South Africa is in an election year and things could get crazy. Journalists and voters should be on guard against fake news, as well as bots and trolls trying to sway voters on social media. Code for Africa, along with the SA National Editors Forum and Media Monitoring Africa, has been hosting workshops about election manipulation. And we're happy now to be joined by Speaker Ben Nimmo. He is a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, analysing trends on disinformation. Ben Nimmo joining us via Skype from Cape Town. Mr. Nimmo, thank you very much. This topic is so thick. Let's start with the very high-profile election in the United States, the one that brought in Donald Trump. Do you believe Facebook, as some others believe, and social media manipulation played a huge role?
Digital interference really played a role in the election. You need to break it down slightly
because there were so many different operations going on at the same time. So you had Russia running social media trolling, propaganda campaigns, and hacking and leaking all at the same time. All of those had an impact. It looks like the hacking and the leaking was by far the most effective. But there was a lot of traffic on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all across the social networks. So it certainly played an impact. The challenge is actually measuring how much it was.
That's my next question. Do you believe it's getting so bad that elections could be won or lost basically through people sitting behind their computers, maybe in other parts of the world even?
If it's a really close election, then yes, it can. That kind of interference can make a difference. It's not always going to do so. For example, the French election in May 2017, the American far right tried to interfere at the last minute, but Emmanuel Macron was so far ahead. He had like a 30-point lead. You're not going to overturn something like that with internet interference. But if it's a really tight race, if there's only a couple of points in it, then anything which can change people's minds and change their voting behavior can actually change the outcome.
So you've been speaking to journalists here. How can we as journalists and as South Africans start really identifying manipulation?
The encouraging thing and the hopeful thing is that a lot of the manipulation we've seen hasn't really been that skillful. Sometimes it's been downright clumsy. And the best example is the Russian operation in 2016 was buying Facebook ads on political issues in America and paying in Russian rubles. It's crazy. And once you start looking out for that kind of thing, the lower level interference is actually relatively easy to spot. If you're looking out for photoshopped images, if you're looking out for fake accounts on social media, the great majority of them are not very well made. And actually, with some fairly basic skills, any journalist and any citizen can spot them.
Give us some clues, though. In South Africa, we are experienced with bots. We had a company here, Bell Pottinger, that has fallen as a result. It really did manage to change the narrative, introduce new concepts that everybody was talking about in South Africa. What can ordinary people look out for on social media?
You need to look out for really basic stuff like profile pictures that don't fit. I was doing a study of Twitter in South Africa around the ANC 54 at the end of 2017. And suddenly, in the middle of all the Twitter conversation, you had hundreds of accounts where the profile pictures were of white Americans from the Midwest who were suddenly posting about South African politics. If you see something like that, it's ringing an alarm bell to say something doesn't make sense here. And then there are skills you can use. If you're browsing in Google Chrome, for example, and you right-click on an image, then it will give you the option to search Google for that image. And it will show you everywhere else that picture has been used. And I've found networks of bots on Twitter where there are about 75,000 bots in the network. And they all have the same profile picture. So all you need to do is a reverse search, and it will show up how many other accounts have the same face. And it's really simple tricks like that, which anyone can learn. But the principle is really look for stuff that doesn't make sense. Look for stuff that tells you as a local, that just doesn't sound like this country to me. And quite often, if you start there, you'll then find some kind of attempted manipulation going on.
And Ben, I'm sure you've looked at the problem of journalists trying to deal with social media. I'd like to give you a concrete example. I was working in the last elections. Suddenly across social media, there were pictures of ballot boxes that had been dumped on the side of the road. We didn't know what was going on. We couldn't verify the story. The elections body later said those votes had been counted. Yes, they had been dumped, but everybody had signed for them. They had been counted. They did not change the election at all. When something is trending on social media, you can't verify it as a journalist. What should you do?
There are things you can do. Something we see at every election, and I've seen this in every country where I've covered elections. On election day, you'll see photos or videos of bad behavior, be it ballot box stuffing or tampered voting. And almost always, those images were actually from a different country some years before. Not always, but in a great majority of cases. It's a really easy way for someone to try and cause trouble. So again, if you're searching on social media for images which have already been used elsewhere, you can at least weed out the cases where you can show, okay, this is not what's happening. When something has started to trend, it's very, very hard to pull it back. But what you can do is tell people, calm down. All we can see from this photo is a particular situation. And over-interpreting it without the evidence is actually going to make the situation worse. And then you can call out the people who are pushing the story. You can see who is it who's sharing that image, who is it who's making the allegations, and then you can actually reach out to them directly and say, you're claiming this, where's your evidence? You're basing this on a single photo. Single photos can mean many different things. But you're right, once something has started trending, it's very hard to pull it back. And that's one of the inherent problems of social media in an election cycle.
Does that raise the profile then of traditional media to take it more seriously, to become the sifter and sort out fake from true news on social media, even for viewers?
I mean, that's always been one of the challenges of a journalism on social media, that they move so fast. The good thing is now that there's an international network of people who are interested in this kind of problem. And you've got really good experts in South Africa who are great at mapping some of the networks and the disinformation channels there are in this country. It's not realistic to expect the journalists to do it all themselves, because I used to be a journalist. I know what it's like when you have to file X times a day. But what you can do is actually work with the open source community. And ahead of time, you can find the groups like Code for Africa and Media Monitoring Africa and the experts that they know. And you can actually build a coalition, an alliance of people who are skilled in this field. And you can share the burden.
And I'm happy to say that is slowly happening in South Africa, fact-checking becoming so important. The world over, though, still journalists accused of quickly jumping on social media, getting stories from there. Do you believe generally we are too lazy, too gullible?
I don't think it's laziness as much as pressure. I know the pressure a journalist can be under, and it's really easy just to grab a couple of tweets, put them in as your comments. But there was a case in the US, for example, when a mainstream paper did that. It picked up 2 comments on a particular story, and both of them came from the Russian troll farm. So it's important for journalists to treat social media the way as any other source. If it's an anonymous source, you've got to have a really good reason for using it.
Finally,
and so
Sure, Ben, let me throw in one final question, because we have a politician recently accused of sexual assault, saying that this is a dirty tricks campaign. You obviously cannot comment on that case. It has to go to court. But will we see more of this in an election? Is that the trend, where there are claims made on social media where it's harder to verify, but that can sway people's opinions?
I think we will. And I think that's something which every country is facing. But it does come back down to good old legwork journalism. The medium is different. It's going out on Facebook or Twitter. But still, you've got to have somebody who's making the accusation. They've got to have the evidence. And at some point, you've got to call them on that and say, right, put it on the table.
All right, thank you very much for your time tonight. Beware the trolls and bots ahead of elections. That was Ben Nimmo from the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research.